Um, okay, welcome everyone, and thank you for coming, and thank you very much, Krittika Sharma, for being here. My name is Jasmir, and I'm a PhD student at the Slade, and will be chairing along with Professor Krittika at UCL and delivering a talk on my art practice after this talk. I'm a co-lead with PhD student Bindu Mehra and Professor Kristen Kreider at the Slade for the research titled Shai, British Asian Art, with a focus on South Asian and East Asian contemporary artist practice research group. The group is supported by British Art Network, and the seminar is the fifth in a series of talks and events over the coming year. The talk is being recorded, and the session will be an opportunity for questions and also answers. Thanks to, so the seminar will explore insufficient exposure of Asian British artists in exhibitions and other projects. The seminar will consider the reasons why, including racism and misogyny from within and outside Asian British cultures. We will identify strategies for redressing this imbalance with input from artists, curators, and writers who have a leading role in the development of contemporary art through their own practices. The seminar will raise awareness of issues and also facilitate development of exhibitions and symposia showcasing work by Asian British artists, including a consideration of this group not being a hermetically sealed group. The Shai British Asian Art Research Group aims to address underrepresentation of British Asian artists in exhibitions and challenge their understanding and invisibility in the British art world. And our focus is to shed light on the systematic barriers, including racism and misogyny, that prevent these artists from gaining equal exposure and recognitions within the visual arts. Through reading groups, film screenings, performance workshops, and symposia, we aim to create thinking spaces that will unpack notions of invisibility and disenchantment and identity strategies for redressing this imbalance. And as a research group, we believe that disenchantment and invisibility are not simply a result of a lack of exposure or representation, but are deeply rooted in systematic inequalities and power dynamics. Our research group aims to challenge these dynamics to contribute to a more inclusive and equitable art world, which in itself is crucial for the growth and advancement of British cultural landscape by bringing together artists, writers, curators, academics, and researchers. We aim to generate new channels of thinking and networking that will contribute towards the development of British art curating, for example, in generating material and networks leading to a new exhibition of contemporary artist work. And the project will be archived within the Slade School of Fine Art. So Kristen Kreider will now introduce Krittika Sharma.
It's my absolute pleasure to do this introduction, and just a quick thanks to you, Jasmir, for organizing this, for Bindu on your organization with Shai, and for Krittika for coming. It's a real pleasure. Krittika Sharma will discuss the founding of Indigo Matter, its program, and the potential of women of color-led spaces in London. She will also discuss her background in the history of art and her previous research in textile history and early Buddhist sculpture. Indigo Matter is a London-based contemporary art gallery founded in 2019. The gallery presents local and international emerging artists with a view towards generating impactful cross-cultural discourse. Indigo Matter is proud to focus on artists who are underrepresented and from marginalized communities, especially women artists. Krittika was born in New Delhi, India. and the program has reflected her background and research interests, especially in cultural hybridity and the diasporas of the Global South. Indigo and Matter was founded in Deptford and moved to Fitzrovia in 2022. And I understand you're moving again. In its current space, the gallery continues hosting intimate, research-led, multidisciplinary inquiries that explore intersections of history, gender, culture, and politics. Indigo and Matter has introduced the work of emerging artists such as Nourain Inam, Raisa Kabir, Haroon Hayward, Amba Sayal Bennett, and Alina Sadi, whose first London solos were held at the gallery. The gallery has also presented interdisciplinary projects with UK-based and international artists such as Harminder Judge, Himali Singh Sun, Leo Robinson, and Jordan Martin Hill. Thank you, Krittika, and over to you.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for having me. This is really exciting, and I'm so glad to be a part of it and to be able to talk about the journey so far. Kind of prepared a presentation that we can go over just to kind of talk about everything. And then, yeah, I would love to hear from everyone and, yeah, answer some questions. I'm going to share my screen, if that's okay. Great. I hope that's all okay and visible for everyone.
Perfect. Yeah.
As Kristen mentioned, I grew up in New Delhi and moved here from Singapore, actually, where I was after New Delhi, and to study history of art. Before this, I worked as a textile archivist and curator with a lot of museums, and my interest kind of grew from there into curation. I trained as an artist before that. So actually, I'm an artist turned curator turned gallerist, which has kind of given me an interesting perspective, I think, firstly into the mediums that artists work with, but also how to look at things. And I think my background's been very important in how I kind of approach the whole gallery. It's, I guess, with art history and with textiles even, and I'll go into it a little bit, there's always layers of meaning within each work and how we study it and how we approach it. And I think that's really inspired me when I'm looking at art from the diaspora here. I can talk a bit more about the gallery, but I wanted to just discuss my research interests a little bit and this wonderful figure of the Buddha first. I moved here to study art history, and I took a few classes in early Buddhist sculpture, which has been an interest of mine, and I wanted to explore that alongside textile history. And there is a series of research on the figure of the Buddha specifically, and how it's been gendered over the years since the 19th century. There's been a lot of research interest in what it looks like, the gendering of it. It's when it's placed in Western museums, people have remarked on its androgyny and how it looks a bit effeminate compared to perhaps Greek art. And I found that really interesting in how it had been studied along over the years since the 19th century. In the beginning, obviously, empire and racism played a big role in how the native body was looked at. And there was a lot of discourse on how the weak and effeminate native male body is what is represented, and that it's a weaker form of feminization was used to weaken how figures were seen, especially male figures in Indian sculpture. And that's kind of, over the years, the research grew into either defensively negating that or other things about how it's a spiritual ideal that's to be achieved. And up until very recently, I think with contemporary art, you realize that there are different ways of looking at things. However, the museum world and how spaces are defined is very different, and how we're trying to either ascribe it as a female or male figure, and how bodies are always gendered. And this is really interesting in how kind of began looking at this while at SOAS, University of London. I'm kind of figuring out what other ways we can look at and what might be a more contemporary, more, in a way, more open way of looking at a figure. And queer theory was one way of kind of looking at a space, creating a space even where you can look at something that destabilizes you and opens up the conversation. You don't necessarily have, it has to be either, but in fact, it invites a multiplicity of perspectives. And so it was about, my research really, my dissertation was based on talking more about this, especially through the figure of the Buddha, which over centuries has had different meanings ascribed to it. And this is kind of guided what history and how a person's context and how things change. This has kind of guided how I started looking at objects. And after SOAS, I met someone at SOAS and we were kind of exploring what to do next. I'd really become interested in contemporary questions through this, just kind of studying the figure of the Buddha and finding how do you look at bodies now, especially brown bodies, for example, and what are the ways of talking about it. And that kind of an interest in more contemporary questions led to looking at the contemporary space of the art gallery and who we were as two South Asian women in London who wanted to talk about maybe our specific experiences, show artists perhaps in their 20s and 30s and kind of add to the conversation, but look at things in a more nuanced manner where we're kind of uncovering different layers. And with the cultural familiarity that our backgrounds brought, we thought that might be a conversation that would be interesting to have. We pitched this to the University of London and started the gallery with a pop-up show. We were lucky enough to kind of get some of that initial support in the beginning and start in a space called Enclave in Deptford, which is South London. And it's quite an exciting space because it's close to Goldsmiths and there are APT studios, and a lot of artist studios tend to be based in South London. And so this was kind of an incubator style space that allowed us to be very involved in the contemporary art scene, the emerging scene, more specifically. And it just began from there in that small space. I think in the beginning we did very interested in the diasporic context because that is my kind of background. And I think because I worked in Southeast Asia and South Asia and then in the UK, I thought this perspective was interesting to have a more international program and focus on kind of these kind of conversations, perhaps being able to contextualize things with this background a little better, offering long-term support, which we realized was missing in a lot of spaces. There seemed to be some tokenization of artists where I think the kind of politics are co-opted. However, no long-term support or no changes are actually seen in kind of the diversity in the art scene. Obviously, things are always evolving and it's become much more exciting and there's so much going on. But I think still, in terms of like diversity in who's starting these spaces and what they're talking about, it's quite, I don't think there's as much going on. We also were interested in developing a market for example, from artists from South Asia or the diaspora based here, which was quite important, I think, in order to offer long-term support and being able to not just have shows that a kind of contextualize their work, but also kind of take it forward and make a kind of substantial, I think, impact on the scene. And also kind of thinking about what South-centric could mean. It's a challenge to, I think leadership is not something that a lot of South Asian diaspora, we don't grow up with these ideas of how women can lead spaces and what that would look like, or what South-centric perspectives could look like. A lot of the value is created within the Western art world via the collector museum nexus, and which is very important and needs to be developed and have more diversity in. But how would you kind of look at things in a way that is not always, kind of referencing something else that is a Western model? it's impossible to kind of obviously split apart things. We are all kind of interrelated. But I think in terms of like kind of diversity of perspectives, thought it would be an important thing to do. Visibility as well is another thing. I think we couldn't see ourselves in the art space, to be quite honest. It felt like a hard thing to start. Firstly, I hadn't seen many women director of color in galleries that I could even approach to have a conversation with, or South Asian women in leadership positions in a lot of art spaces. And so it felt like there was a gap in like where we could see ourselves too, and how I could get maybe a job at a gallery if it was even possible. And I think that visibility was an important thing. And so I did realize that to do anything, you just have to start something on your own and see how that goes. And so it was a small start, but I think it was very impactful. I think we found that first question was, do artists need such a thing? We don't want to tokenize artists and don't want to pigeonhole anyone in a certain context. How do you keep that open as well was always on my mind. But the first question was, do artists want something like this? And would we be able to kind of grow in a sustainable way? It is, after all, an entrepreneurial venture, and it kind of just needs different skill sets. And so that's kind of start in a small way enabled us to kind of grow slowly. This is our space. And it was a really nice space. We had a lot of fun in South London without the pressures of the intense pressures of the crazy rental market of London. And it's quite competitive no matter what gallery you open, because the London art scene is so global. But it's super exciting to be on that stage as well and kind of define who you are and what you do and kind of self-actualize, but also be able to talk, have these really interesting conversations and meet a community of artists that I'm still friends with everyone. And it really felt like you mentioned, Shai feels a lot like a nice community. I think immediately after we started this, it started feeling like there was a community developing and there were conversations to be had. I think in terms of when you are a younger space, I think that where everything is ahead of you and you haven't defined yourself too much, I think it's really exciting to have that and develop that. That show was a Haroon Hayward, a London-based artist, his first solo. And we had a really amazing response for this. And I'll get into his work a little bit after I kind of talk about our second show in the space, which was for the size of our space, which was a big group show. And in this, we worked with a co-curator called Sitara Chofla, who was from New Delhi. Another thing we wanted to do is collaborate with curators from different parts of the world to kind of have different perspectives alongside our own. And this show started with an kind of interest in what South Asian futurism meant, how we could define it, and how it's a different form of world building, what we can say about that and how we can approach it in a more multidisciplinary way. And all of these artists are now doing so well. It was really, all of them are superstars now. But it was so nice and so amazing to work with everyone and kind of put together this presentation, which ranged from sculpture to painting, to drawing. And we also had a book by Himali Singh Soin. This is the beginning of her series that she started, and it's an ongoing interest. And it kind of talks about the two poles and her research in it, starting from her imagining herself as a brown body in an alien landscape, as well as thinking about the subcontinent and futurisms. And so this show kind of was a good one to have initially to kind of talk about these research interests and take them forward. The another thing through the gallery that we had wanted to do was to explore the painting within the UK, and painting and who is kind of in that context, and what kind of market share different artists get, and how can you have more diversity in that. And Haroon's work was really interesting. We met him during a studio visit, and he hadn't really had a show in a while, and it was really, but what we saw was like so incredible. There was such an amazing body of work that he was developing, and this was our second show with him, but his first solo with us. And I think this kind of explore his work. What was interesting is the code switching and kind of hybridity that's evident. And this, I think, a way of looking at diaspora work is what I'm really interested in, is how we kind of move between cultures, and there's a lot of layering of who you are as a person, and it's not necessary to draw it out. But I think the gallery, our perspective is that this makes for an interesting conversation around the work. And as I think my art history background has kind of made me really interested in that, is what are the different layers, or what makes up a specific context, and how you can kind of talk about different things through an image. Haroon's work brings together his interest in electronic music from the 80s with South Asian and West African textiles, alongside yantras, which is from the tantric tradition in India. And it's kind of this cultural hybridity that's so exciting, and that you have access to these different art histories, along with working with these traditional mediums that are so steeped in Western art history, as well as his interest in the landscapist and abstractionist from a variety of different areas. We moved to central London, and eventually that's me in front of the current space we're in. We kind of grew the gallery in South London and decided in 2022 that we wanted to move to a different location, maybe more central. And we met, so in our previous space, there were 4 galleries, and we kind of had a really nice community vibe too. So with one other gallery, we decided to move to central London and kind of take the next steps to a larger space. It's called Kirkman House, and it's on Whitfield Street. It's kind of felt like coming full circle, because we're very close to Slade and SOAS and all of the kind of University of London spaces. And it's been great to be there. It's lots of galleries have subsequently come up, and Fitzrovia has quite a scene now. This move has also meant that I think the better opportunities for the artists we show, and we're moving again, but I think we are going to take a step forward and see what kind of space we want to get after this. We've done some really amazing shows in this space, and it felt like it was really nice in terms of audiences as well. People they came to both spaces. We used to have a really amazing audience in South London as well. It's been really nice to move more central and have add to that. Someone whose work I wanted to talk about, who we've shown in the new space, is Nurain Anam. And likewise, her work has a lot of these ideas of cultural hybridity and how she negotiates different spaces. She trained as a miniature painter since she was 14, and then came to study at Slade, and was kind of exposed to a whole different landscape here, looking at works in the flesh by Rothko, as well as accessing these miniature painting collections at the V&A and the British Museum. A lot of times in South Asia, we don't have access to these collections, and a lot of collections, to be honest, are here in the UK. So it's really interesting when artists are able to see these works in the flesh, and how that kind of changes their work. So she's been exploring these questions of, firstly, her training as a miniature painter and what she wants to talk about, along with like these really large panels where there are sections of very expressive color, obviously inspired by different strands of Western art history. And so there's a tension between how you see certain detailed portions along with contrasted with these very expressive, kind of looser portions. And she's interested in narrative, which ranges from the horror genre. And I found that interesting as well, is women, firstly, women painters talking about surrealism in a way, as well as kind of a kind of feminist version of horror and what that could mean, especially since she creates scenes that are quite domestic, and what that says about her being a young woman who grew up in Karachi and moved to London, and how she's navigating that. And it's a lot of it is very personal. She talks about finding romance and the challenges of that, very universal experience, but also her kind of dealing with different cultural settings. So very layered work. There's lots going on. I think it's very immersive because she plays a lot with scale. So when you're standing in front of it, it does envelop you, but also it's you're supposed to come closer and kind of access these different layers that are embedded in the work, and combined with like different technical kind of portions which she focuses on and she's really good at. This work, for example, combines her interest in horror and kind of more expressive painterly styles. She was awarded the Wilhelmina Barnes Graham Emerging Artist Award, and has been traveling a lot to St. Ives in Cornwall, which has added another interesting layer to her work. And we are going to have a solo with her in our new space. That'll be the first show that'll inaugurate our new space. That will, in that space, we'll kind of show this new series that has developed in St. Ives, London, and Karachi. So 3 kind of places next to water bodies painted in the St. Ives coast and the Karachi, where there is the sea as well as Thames. So it talks about women and water bodies, and it's really, really excited to introduce that work. Talking a bit more about the kind of market and how important that is when we think of painters, and how creating that is very important for like a diversity of artists. There has been, obviously African art has had, it does tend to come in trends, which isn't obviously great, but to kind of create a market that's more solid, you need definitely a nexus of collectors, institutions, and galleries. And it's kind of what this global South perspective is how we look at that, is really that the prominent markets are the US and European countries, and then the emerging sphere is South America, Africa, India, and Southeast Asia. This is kind of guided how art is appreciated and valued. Globally, I think these ideas of African art market or Asian art market are quite new, developing in the 90s. Before that, Europe was really the center of the kind of art world and how value was generated. And I think when we've looked at the global South and even South Asia, it's been really interesting that you can't obviously be pan-South Asian. It's also kind of made us realize the restrictions of that, and how you can't obviously claim that there is one South Asia. There's so much diversity in the region, and there's so many different conversations to be had. And that's kind of a driving force as well, is to look at the region in a more nuanced manner and explore this idea of what South Asia means, but also that you need many more kind of diverse experiences and voices to kind of talk about it as a whole. And some multidisciplinary inquiries that we've undertaken. This was the first book we published by Jordan Martin Hell, a trans writer, artist born in the US, based in London. And it also looked at the horror genre, really. It's called Rip Lessons, Notes on Deviance and Death. And it was really amazing to work on this book, from like the reading of it and talking about it. Jordan's really talented, and it was, I think, really exciting to do our first book project as well, and all that it involves. And I think we'll definitely do that in the future as well, the gallery. We really want to have different talks and kind of do similar projects where we kind of have a lot of personal narrative explored alongside different ideas that the artists want to explore. Something about my textile background as well. I'm really interested in textile-based works because of that. And this is an artist, London-based artist who's currently studying at Chicago School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Raisa is been working as a weaver and textile artist for a while. She's done a lot of prominent shows, and her first solo was at the gallery in Deptford. And we had kind of been talking for a while and wanted to show different aspects of her practice. First, it's very installation based, then the weavings as well as a performance element. And the kind of interdisciplinary practice is very exciting, as well as how Raisa references textiles and textile history in her work, using lots of embedded histories and motifs, as well as her performance often takes the form of her wearing traditional clothes and performing in different spaces, and weaving using a body, which highlights labor and the kind of often hidden things that go behind textile art and global textile trade. I wonder if you can see the side of this, right? But we are also working on a show with her, which will bring together some new textile-based works along with new performances. And that will also be in the new space. This is a map-based work that is new, that will be in the show. And in this, she's kind of mapped the Bengal Delta, which is her ancestral land, and which was calculated to be underwater by 2050. Kind of a map that highlights that, but also is kind of grieves this of how diaspora looks at their homeland and ideas of loss of that because of climate change, and kind of complex geopolitical realities of the region that have brought that about. And it's very much textile history has been a very important aspect of this region. And she, through her contemporary work, she excavates that. So this work really is kind of become a very personal note on that for the artist, kind of comment on what is going on in the region. Another work that's part of the new series is Tiger, Tiger, Silk Throat. And this is taken from the main figures in the motif that's repeated. It's been taken from Tipu Sultan's mauling the tiger imagery from the V&A. I don't know if everyone's seen that, but it depicts a tiger, a Bengal tiger, mauling a British officer, and that imagery has often been used to kind of the aggression of the colonial rule, to kind of describe the local, the courts kind of fighting against that. But also there's a painting, Retribution, by Edward Armitage, that depicts a personified Britannia slaying a Bengal tiger. And so she's referencing these complex themes and kind of excavating hidden power structures. It's also, for her, like, these works are powerful tools of resistance to kind of repurpose these symbols and kind of use them in the textile, as textile works of art. We had a solo show with Leo Robinson this year, who is a Glasgow-based artist who works a lot with spiritual technologies and kind of excavating different ideas behind these technologies. The show was called On Exactitude, and it's from the short story On Exactitude and Science by Borges. And it's very fascinating how it kind of describes a map that becomes the size of the region it's mapping, and how that makes it quite redundant. in this show, we actually were able to have some works, some 18th and 19th century tantric works alongside his new series of works, which was very exciting exchange. He obviously references various different spiritual technologies in his work, including looking a lot at tantric art, which has had a really big influence on so many global artists. Tantra as an art form, but it's not often discussed in that kind of exchange, like the East-West, West-East, how influence flows. And so I found it very interesting how he's been kind of exploring that. And so his work alongside these grid-based new works that he created, kind of how he talks about these different ideas. So this new series was shown at the gallery this year. Also thinking of maps, it's interesting. I don't know if you've seen this map in the V&A, this shawl map in the V&A's collection, but it's quite similar to how one describes a map and how it firstly describing a place. This map is obviously of Kashmir and was made in the first quarter of the 19th century. It was probably made in Ranbir Singh's court to be gifted to British officials. And Kashmir has had a very complex history as well of different people staking claim over it. Its position as a important textile trading region, the history of Pashmina and how it's been exported. And this kind of textile describes all the complexities of that. There is firstly the mapping of a region that is very contentious, and many people stake their claims on it. And that has been a source of revenue for different kind of rulers of the region. And who owns the map is often, ideas of imperial kind of ownership of a different position, of different locations, as well as obviously commodity trading, which is very important and has kind of Pashmina trade moved from east to the west. So this shawl and the gifting of it to takes on such a meaning, as well as gifting of textiles itself has so many different meanings in the region. And so likewise, this kind of map shawl becomes a very interesting way to look at an object. So it's beyond just craftsmanship, which is sometimes what I think textiles are reduced to, and it becomes this important political kind of object. And I think I'm going to leave it there and kind of see if we want to talk about any of these a little bit more.
Okay, great. So that was really interesting, Krittika, and we all really look forward to discussing more about the interesting projects that you've navigated in terms of cross-cultural relationships as well. So okay, I think I'll start my presentation.
Jasmir, can I do an introduction for you?
That'd be great. Thank you, Kristen.
Yeah, and just to mention, because I think after Jasmir presents, then we'll have a conversation with the two of you, just so people can hold their questions and save their questions. Okay, so I'll go ahead and introduce Jasmir. Okay. So Jasmir, in your talk, Jasmir will talk about how, as a painter, she explores the urban alienation. Explores urban alienation and the contemporary transcultural. Most paintings show figures, including those of British South Asian women, commuters in urban exterior and interior environments, such as domestic rooms. Some figures are shown alone or as part of a crowd. Her paintings reflect multiple viewpoints of her immediate environments. She uses monochrome as well as heightened color and creates a vivid, empathic expression in her paintings of urban scenes with crowds of anonymous people in transit. Jasmir will discuss how cross-cultural influences of her own identity, how cross-cultural influences her own identity as a British South Asian artist. And then your bio. Jasmir Creed is a practice-led PhD researcher at the Slade School of Fine Art. Solo exhibitions of her work include Utopolis at Warrington Museum and Art Gallery in Warrington, Dystopolis at Victoria Gallery and Museum in Liverpool, and Urban Forest at Delta House Studios. And alongside of that, a catalog was distributed by Liverpool University Press. Jasmir's group exhibitions include the Asia Triennial Manchester in 2018, Home and Unhome at the Sichuan Fine Arts Institute in Chongqing, China, 2002, and Art Contact at the Istanbul Art Fair in Turkey in 2021. Where is Home is a tour including the Whitworth Art Gallery, Manchester, 2022 and 23. And her paintings are in collections including the Victoria Gallery and Museum, Liverpool, and the Imperial War Museum, North. Thanks. Over to you, Jasmir.
Thank you very much, Kristen, for the great introduction. Okay, so in this painting on the screen, it's titled Couple, where I show an elderly South Asian couple, my grandparents on my mother's side. They're sat down on a sofa and facing the viewer directly. The figures appear to be dwarfed or shrouded by the long backdrop created by the curtains behind them. They are seen dressed in traditional South Asian clothing, with the woman wearing an Indian sari, which is a robe-like garment made of woven fabric with one end fastened to the waist and the other resting over one shoulder as a shawl. And the man has a turban on, which comes in varieties of styles and is traditionally worn on the head as well. The painting is large scale, which could be seen as being expansive, and the figures seem small and dwarfed by the space. And this painting is a reflection of my experience of being fully immersed in both my South Asian and British heritages, which are always blending due to interactions between different cultures. Taking in cultural elements and dressing in their manner and speaking with my grandparents' language can occasionally make me feel as though I'm alienating myself from the outside. I observe, witness, and absorb Indian culture as an observer, and I experience a sense of dislocation when I have to mentally leave my usual setting, which has fewer South Asian elements, like my speaking English, to visit my grandparents' home, where there is a rich fusion of cultural elements, like they're speaking a mixture of Punjabi and English, and a profusion of objects. And I'm examining how listening to my grandparents speak Punjabi and looking at South Asian clothing can at times make me feel dislocation and alienated. And the curtains in the back of the painting make me think of views off the back of cars, where you can see the traffic in the far distance. The white background of the curtain is painted in thin layers of paint, and this gives me the impression that when someone leaves their house, whether by car or public transport, for example, some sights are being left behind. In this painting, the curtain makes me think of people moving from their own spaces into a new one. The curtain represents my grandparents' migration from their native India to the UK, where they had to adjust to a new life. In this canvas here, a young South Asian woman is depicted in conflict, and where the woman has her head tilted with a neutral expression. Her figure is obscured by her pale orange clothing typical of South Asian attire, and an elderly couple is seen to the left with their heads bowed and their arms entwined. The old figures allude to my grandparents. They are well known to me, and their migration stories from India to Britain always hold my interest. And the two figures in the background are positioned so that it alludes to my feeling apart from them, and that the impasto figures' features are still discernible. The figures are not actually my grandparents, because I'm experimenting with how my own personal memory is translated into various images that I paint. And it's ambiguous as to who the woman is in the painting. You wonder who she is, or is she considering the possibility that she may be related to the couple in the background? And through the woman's conflicted expression, I'm using her as my like an alter ego to communicate this feeling itself. And the Admiralty Arch in London, which is shown in the background, symbolises colonial power, wealth, migration, and also royalty, serving as the entrance to the Mall, which leads to Buckingham Palace. This painting, Solitude, depicts a South Asian woman undergoing change, surrounded by London's National Gallery. The painting conveys a sense of loss and uncertainty through its ethereal presence created through free brushstrokes and gestures. The painting explores the countries overrun by migrant arrivals and the impact of migrant arrivals on the country. And the painting explores the ethereal presence of the woman in the foreground of the painting. And in Gaze, a woman is looking straight at the observer, and it's unclear how old or young she is, with her head almost resting on her shoulder and her posture comfortably tucked into the chair. The woman exudes a sense of solitude, and the piece can be interpreted as being claustrophobic, a word that connotes a fear of loneliness or of alienation, as well as unknown emptiness. And in my paintings, various points of view depict how alienated people feel in urban areas within a capitalist society. And claustrophobic is a word that suggests loneliness or alienation, as well as unidentified emptiness, and it can be used to describe the piece. In my paintings, I show how people experience alienation in urban environments within a capitalist society from a range of viewpoints. I was struck by Alice Neil's painting, such as Woman, 1966, which explores motherhood through female gaze and expresses the psychology of people, including women. The painting features a young Indian woman with a mauve sari, chiffon layers, and a sleeveless white blouse, a style first worn by Bollywood heroines in the 1960s. And it's interesting how I also consider in my work how the Western male perspective in art history often fails to account for the inclusion of artists from the Western canon. And I was reading author Linda Nocklin's 1971 piece, Why Have There Been No Great Women Artists? And she refutes the woman problem and asserts women's inability to achieve greatness. The presumptions underlying questions of this nature range widely and are sophisticated, from open-minded amazement that after so many years of nearly equal treatment, many men have faced challenges too. And the article discusses female artists in perspective, which are delicate and nuanced in terms of their handling of painting. In this painting, The Gift, I feature a woman in a pastoral setting, swinging in soft light, creating sentimental and nostalgic mood, reflecting light from the park and sunsets, evoke memories of past experiences, and the bold colour schemes contrast with emerald green leaves, reflecting my thoughts on past experiences. And my inspiration for this painting was a still from the 1968 Indian film Charulata, directed by Satyajit Ray. The film centres on Charulata, the intelligent and alluring wife of Bhupati, He edits and publishes a political newspaper, and such as Eat Rise films are screened globally, with British South Asian homes among them, offering a blend of cultures. In On Home, I feature a South Asian woman with St. Paul's Cathedral, influenced by Peter Ackroyd's History of London. And I was struck by what Peter Ackroyd was saying when he mentions that London is a biography that follows the history of the city itself, and he talks about the changing face of cities. Ackroyd's accounts describe it as a human shape with its own laws of life and growth. And Ackroyd's book takes a thematic approach covering the medieval period up to the 19th century. And the woman's closed eyelids and exotic clothing suggest pain, daydreaming, or meditation. The monument's colder colour scheme, purple infused with grey, contrasts with the figure's warm Indian climate. I explore alienation here and cultural connections in London. And the monument is an example of the London environment's colder colour scheme, which is purple infused with grey for the sky, while the figure's colour scheme of purples, yellows, and oranges occasionally resembles the warm climate of India. And I paint because the materiality resists my intentions and the image never comes out the way I plan. Hence, painting creates an exciting journey that I have chosen rather than it being imposed on me. And painting is a way of integrating my experiences, including of alienation, within an aesthetic experience, whereby the paintings I produce enable me to express my creativity and thought through the excitement of using colour and paint, which is the opposite of alienation. And painting is puzzle solving, where visual elements, including colours, shapes, and lines, work together in coherent ways to express ideas or emotions about things I see, about memory and imagination. My canvases are like a map, a physical and psychological space. Painting creates curiosity and suspense, similar to my exploring my urban environment. Painting is suspenseful because you never know what will happen. And painting, it can be a poetic statement with different images that cannot be fully explained in words. And the painting evokes empathy by relating to the fleeting nature of people in artificially constructed urban spaces, particularly in large towns in Britain. And my identity is influenced by the relationship between alienation and transculturalism, reflected in my own imagery and techniques. And On Home is a painting that explores loneliness and montage in urban scenes. The title ambiguously refers to a woman being undone from her home in London, possibly wealthy or impoverished. The woman's sari suggests her ancestry as a migrant from outside Britain, and my paintings often depict women in public settings, highlighting their alienation due to male patriarchal foundations and extra alienation in various social, political environments explored by writer Lauren Elkin. And Rebecca Solnit's book Wanderlust emphasises the role of walking in creating paths, roads, and trade routes, bringing us back to historical sites. Walking in urban spaces involves social interactions and generates a rhythm of thinking, suggesting that the mind is a landscape and walking is one way to traverse it. Solnit's experiences are related to cultural experiences and can make people feel detached in urban environments. And I explore urban alienation in transcultural contexts through self-portraits, crowds, buildings, and sculptures, focusing on South Asian British communities and cross-cultural influences in urban settings. And my figurative paintings are inspired by artists like Nisa Khan, Edward Hopper, and Labena Hibid, which feature vibrant colour schemes, cultural perspectives, and self-portraits in historical locations like Trafalgar Square. And also in my work, I'm experimenting with ways charcoal and ink can create and transmit ideas and feelings. And the colours and tones I choose evoke feelings in me. And light can be seen over the moving figures in charcoal and ink. And the shadows cast by the figures are depicted by the whiteness of the paper, with the ink highlighting how visuals are transitory moments captured in time, some of them never remaining still, and the figures in the drawing seem to be present and absent. And Lynette Yidam Bioka's Flying the League with the Night exhibition at Tate Britain showed paintings of people who do not exist. She uses found images and her own imagination, both familiar and mysterious. They invite viewers to project their own interpretations and raise important questions of identity and representation. Similarly, my painting people who are clearly of South Asian background within the tradition of European oil painting are found images, and most recently from the imagination. And I've started to paint from my drawings to show direct relationships between my hand and the canvas, to show a felt experience of exploring the figures, facial features, and the textures of the urban environment through paint and colour. And the figures in my paintings do exist, but are anonymous, unlike in Bioka's work. And I was influenced by Matthew Christian's paintings, which explore childhood, religion, colonialism, and empire. And he's a figurative painter who has experienced cultural hybridity and how he spent his childhood in 3 cities, Birmingham, Bradford, and in Dhaka, capital city of Bangladesh. He has a British-born father and an Indian-born mother. Similarly, I have experienced cultural identity being South Asian British. And in these small paintings, I close in on different portraits, and they're painted close up with thick impasto paint, and they depict South Asian figures aiming to convey their emotions through facial expressions. And the bright colour of the clothing may be seen as being exotic, reflecting the warm climate of India, despite not being familiar with South Asian culture. And cross-pollinating imagery from different sources, like history and my own observational drawings and photographs, and developing my handling of my paint and graphic materials are key parts of my own practice. And in terms of I'm also focusing on the underrepresentation of South Asian British artists in my research and also my art practice. In September 2021, I initiated Interworld's Transcultural Hybridity in Art as a comprehensive long-term project encompassing various activities like a digital archive. And among others, I presented 3 public seminars on transcultural art since 2021, with funding from the UCL Institute of Advanced Studies. And the 3rd talk I gave in October 2022 was titled Interspace, was about the underrepresentation of British Asian female artists, and was supported by Tate and the Paul Mellon Centre and the British Art Network. I offer, I feel, a unique perspective on the transcultural in art through studying contemporary art from post-colonialism perspectives, and address the knowledge gap in contemporary British South Asian women's art. And I believe that greater study, critique, and promotion of contemporary South Asian British female artists at this crucial time will redress the marginalisation they face in British art due to racism, misogyny, and lack of role models, in order to defy stereotypes and resist the ghettoisation of gender and race. Artists engage with aesthetics and materiality in their work, which includes discussing identities. The diasporic aesthetic shifts the emphasis and promotes intercultural conversation by problematizing ties to one's ancestral homeland. And my first programmed Interworlds talk was with Al Mitha, Director of Asia Triennial Manchester and Research Fellow in South Asian Cultures at Manchester Metropolitan University. And 3 more Interworlds panel discussions also involved artists from diasporic backgrounds in Britain, including Jai Chuhan, Parminder Kaur, Errol Francis, Yvonne Feng, Sintha Tantra, and Remy Rana Allen. And the Shai British Asian Art Group has formed from the Interworlds project, and we include artists both from the South and East Asian diasporas, which explore how Asia is not a homogenous entity, but comprised of different interconnected cultures reflected in the British diaspora from South and East Asia. For the Shai British Asian artists, these projects, I'm joined by fellow PhD candidate at the Slade, Bindu Mehra, and Professor Kristen Kreider. And so far as 3 joint leads, we have staged 4 events within our research group, which involved talks presenting South and East British Asian contemporary artist practice. And so lastly, at Warrington Museum and Art Gallery, I had a solo exhibition titled Utopolis, which featured paintings and drawings with dystopian settings of futuristic architecture. The exhibition showcased my paintings and drawings of crowds, iconic buildings, sculptures, and self-portraits and room interiors. And the artwork reflected multiple perspectives and fractured identities, using oil paint to construct space and explore vivid colours in figurative paintings. And Utopolis was held in a grand Victorian building with historical resonance, showcasing contemporary art alongside permanent collections of paintings and sculptures. My paintings and drawings constituted an art intervention. Each piece of artwork was positioned next to pre-existing paintings and sculptures according to the exhibition's curation and presentation strategy. And later, at the start of 2027, I will be co-curating an exhibition titled Many Stories at the Midlands Arts Centre in Birmingham, along with artist Jai Chuhan and curator and writer Matthew Price. We will be staging 15 British South Asian women artists working and living in Britain in displaying their figurative paintings, showcasing their experiences of living in British cities, emphasising diversity in contemporary British painting. And in September of this year, I'll be exhibiting at the Victoria Museum and Gallery in Liverpool with artist Tony Phillips. Tony Phillips, a mixed heritage artist from Liverpool, will exhibit Indian miniature paintings, focusing on British colonial history and its aftermath, that will accompany my large oil paintings. So I've now come to the end of my talk, so thank you very much. We'll now go to the Q&A.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jasmir. Just a quick question. Is everybody okay to move into the discussion? Does anyone need a 5-minute break, or how is everybody feeling? Maybe. Okay, good. Thank you. We had a thumbs up, so I guess we'll carry on. Thank you both so much. I just want to say a huge thanks to you both, and it was interesting to hear different kind of synergies around the research practices. The cultural hybridity aspect, the community building, world building in Krittika's talk as well. And also the maps. I thought that was an interesting, the idea of the painting as the map, and then the highlighting the map. So those were just striking commonalities that I heard across the two. What do you think? Oh, great. Okay, Bindu.
Yeah, hi. This is a question for Krittika. Hi, Krittika, thank you for your wonderful presentation. It was, it was a pleasure listening to it. And I was, thinking about your research on the Buddha, and I found it really very interesting. And also I was like did you ever present it in India? Because it's kind of controversial in some ways. Not sure how well it would be received, but I was kind of, maybe, you never know. So that was my first question. And the second one was, what are the challenges that you faced as, in terms of starting this gallery, in terms of, as a curator, as somebody also running a very kind of commercial enterprise, which is running a gallery, you have to think of, and also coming in as an artist as well, where you have one part of it as you as an artist, the other as a curator, and then the third as a gallery owner. There's a lot of, how do you resolve these issues, challenges within your own thinking?
Thank you. Thanks for the question. And Jasmir, really lovely presentation. Thank you, everyone. To answer your first question about the Buddha figure, not really. I don't think so this was a class, this kind of module was Ashley Thompson, who teaches at SOAS, her kind of module, and kind of talking about the figure of the Buddha across Southeast Asia and South Asia. And I don't think anywhere where Buddhism is practiced as a living kind of religion, you cannot speculate on the gender of the Buddha. And some of the research was on the tension between how the Buddha is depicted in religious texts and how it's perceived in Western museums. And subsequently, the visual kind of debate on the Buddha's gender generates, and body types and androgyny, and kind of how it can come across as transphobic in today's landscape, yet it's so tied into religion that you want that the Buddha was a man. So yeah, there's all that, but ultimately I guess the point was that we're asking the wrong question. It's not to speculate on the gender, rather have open spaces where none of these questions arise, and feminization is not used as a strategy to pull someone down. Yeah. That of be looking like more like looking any one which way is fine. And I think it says more about our spaces than the actual historical Buddha. And so the kind of research steered well clear of like how the religion itself is practiced, but what we project onto the figure, which are our own anxieties of anxieties related to androgyny, and when we can't place things, or when things are not, they don't look like what we expect them to look like, or they can't be classified. And I think it was more about like describing a space, what a kind of maybe an art space could look like, where multiplicity is welcomed. And it eventually went into that. And I think there's a lot of censorship, to be quite honest, in India right now for the weirdest things. Like you can't talk about a lot of things. And this is like, even when I was growing up, there wasn't as much. We fought a lot about various things. We protested to get various rights. Women are always protesting for women's rights there. And there's so much always going on. However, I think the spaces for that are becoming less and less. Yeah. So I think that's why this kind of research tends to be elsewhere, where we kind of group in smaller groups and discuss these things. And funding seems to come from elsewhere too. Like a lot of this research